This July, the 32 leaders of the NATO alliance will meet in Washington to celebrate NATO's 75th anniversary. In 75 years of NATO history, the alliance has done a lot to protect the security of its members, but there have also been some real disagreements within the alliance, especially over who should pay the costs. It's helpful to think about NATO's history in terms of 4 phases. The first phase was the Cold War, which started when a small number of West European countries banded together after World War II in order to defend themselves against the rising Soviet threat and tie America to their security. NATO, of course, triumphed in the Cold War, and the fact that the end of the Cold War was peaceful was very important in light of the fact that so many great power competitions in history have been so violent. When that phase of NATO's history ended, many thought that it would actually disband. The Soviet Union, after all, was now gone. But instead, NATO found a new raison d'etre in 2 things. First of all, in quelling nationalist violence that was taking place in the Balkans. NATO had some success in this regard, but has also been criticized recently for some of its mistakes, such as the accidental bombing of the Chinese embassy during the Kosovo War in 1999. At the same time that NATO was dealing with ethnic violence in the Balkans, it was also enlarging, expanding its membership into spaces where the Soviet Union had previously occupied. In some sense, this was part of the broader Western effort to expand democracy in these years. But some people also were warned that it would sow the seeds of future conflict with Russia. In 2001, new differences between Europe and the United States were emerging within the alliance. These were largely because the United States had grown so much more powerful than its European allies, so much so that people worried that America was carrying too much of the water within the alliance. But the terrible attacks on the United States on 9/11 allowed the Allies to submerge their growing differences in the name of fighting a global war on terror. NATO joined America in Afghanistan, and European allies fought alongside the United States for many years there. Of course, there were differences, over the Iraq War in particular, when France and Germany attacked the United States for its invasion of Iraq, on the grounds that this war had nothing to do with counterterrorism. NATO continued to expand in these years, adding more new members in Central and Eastern Europe. The most controversial move in this enlargement of the alliance came in 2008, when President George W. Bush promised membership to Georgia and Ukraine over the objections of not only some of his advisors, but also many European allies. Russia promptly invaded Georgia, and the idea of Georgian and Ukrainian membership in NATO was put on the back burner. This all changed in 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine, the first time. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2014 refocused the alliance's attention on the Russian threat in this 4th phase of NATO's history. Not all has gone smoothly, however. The big difference between America's powerful military and European militaries remains. It's a difference that President Trump drew particular attention to during his presidency, often lambasting the European allies for not spending enough on defense. In 2022, when Russia so violently invaded Ukraine a second time, the alliance refound the unity that it had lost over the course of the last 30 years. It's now refocused largely on the threat from Russia. And this is a good thing, because many European allies are starting to spend more money on defense than they ever have, or at least than they have since the end of the Cold War. But there's a challenge here, which is that the United States, while concerned about the threat that Russia poses to Europe, is primarily focused on the threat that China poses in East Asia, and is bound to spend the balance of its military and diplomatic resources in dealing with the rise of China. What this means is that if NATO is going to survive beyond this 75th anniversary, Europe will need to take on a much larger role in defending Europe's territory against Russia. It remains to be seen whether or not European publics and their leaders are ready to do this. There are some good signs, but there's still a long way to go if NATO is going to make it to its 100th anniversary in 2049.